right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today to talk about understanding the state of product analytics. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive right in here. And before we get started, I wanted to just run through a few housekeeping items for today's session. So if you have any questions, you can submit them at any point during the session by using the Q&A widget, which is at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering your questions live during the end of the presentation. This webinar is also being recorded, so don't feel like you need to take any notes. We'll be sending an email within 24 hours where you'll have the link to the recording. And lastly, if you're having any issues with audio, just click the little caret next to the mic in the bottom left-hand corner of your audio output, or you can dial in from your phone. And don't worry, everyone is automatically muted. So with those details covered, let me introduce our speakers. From Mixpanel, we have Ross Walker, our Senior Solutions Consultant. Ross has a technical background and has spent the last 2 years working with our customers throughout EMEA to design and implement analytics strategies that drive innovation. When he isn't sharing his analytics expertise in webinars like this, Ross loves a bit of competition, which I myself have seen at our ping pong table in the office. We're also joined by Christian Arsab, Digital Marketing Manager at Elite International, a Malmo-based firm that has helped hundreds of reputable brands launch products we all know and love. Christian's capabilities cover digital marketing areas, including everything from strategy and MarTech design to cross-channel marketing and lead generation. He's passionate about combining data, technology, and creativity to deliver human-centric digital experiences for customers. Christian also has a great love for the outdoors and enjoys exploring them on his bike. So we have a full agenda today, and we'll begin with Ross sharing some highlights from our recently released State of Product Analytics report. This includes insights uncovered from our survey of nearly 500 product teams around the world on how they're using product analytics to drive product-led growth. Then, Christian is going to dive into how we see some top brands tackling the questions and challenges outlined in the report, including a review of a brand, Pix Food, that is doing this quite well. Lastly, Christian and Ross are going to turn the slides off and we'll have an unscripted discussion on how we see the world of product analytics evolving, especially as we enter a new world redefined by COVID-19. We'll be answering Q&A live during this point, and we encourage everyone to participate in the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to hand it on over to Ross.
Thank you, Charlie. Hi guys. As Charlie says, my name is Ross Walker. I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant at Mixpanel. So I have spent the last couple of years working with a variety of customers across a variety of different industries to ultimately help them understand what they can get out of a product analytics tool such as Mixpanel. But what I'm here to talk to you today about is a little bit around our State of Product Analytics report. Before I jump into that, I think we're going to share a poll with you guys that you should be seeing on screen now, which just a little bit around what are the top questions around your products. What are the top questions that your product team is looking to answer? So if you could answer that question, and we'll just review some of the answers in a little bit. But while you go through that, I think what I want to share with you guys is what was the scope of the product analytics report that we've put out. So initially what we've done is we've taken in almost responses from almost 500 product managers and leaders from a variety of regions from North America, Europe, APAC, Latin America, and the Middle East, again, across a variety of different company sizes. So this isn't just aimed at big enterprises, but it's from the small SMB space up to those big enterprises. So we've got a good spread of the type of users that we have here. And finally, the last thing that we're going to represent is a differentiation in the verticals that those organizations are a part of. And this is something that will come through with the report when we move forward. So with that being said, hopefully that's going to give you a little bit of an understanding of what we're going to talk about in this, and ultimately understanding what matters the most to these different type of organizations in the product teams that they have at the moment, in the product analytics strategies that they have at the moment. And with that being said, we should have some answers to the poll that we have at the moment up on the screen. And I think what we've clearly seen, and this is something that you'll hopefully see gets echoed in some of the reports that come across, and it's interesting. And actually, the thing that's most important to you guys is actually what keeps users engaged and keeps coming back for more. So for me, that's retention, that's engagement, and that's something that you'll see echoed in some of the slides and the responses that we've got from our customers, as well as the people that we've interviewed. So thank you for that, and it's a very interesting insight. But moving forward, I think that the first thing to touch on here, and the first thing that will hopefully resonate with you guys, is that the very best product teams, the people that we speak to, the people that innovate in their markets, very clearly listen very closely to the customers and the end users that they're interacting with. But the important thing here is that they're doing this in a variety of different ways, and they're leveraging a variety of different data sources. So these successful product teams are analyzing data from all different sources across all different avenues. But typically this comes in two different forms, so across both quantitative and qualitative types of data. And actually leveraging both of those is what's going to help you to understand whether the features that you release, whether the interactions that your users are taking are actually helping you drive forward in the markets and drive innovation. The one thing that we took out of the report is actually that most organizations, if not all organizations, are leveraging more heavily quantifiable data rather than qualitative data. And I think that there are a number of reasons for that. And I think that when we start to look at the inherent challenges that comes with qualitative data, it hopefully gives us a bit more understanding why organizations are relying on quantitative data more than qualitative data. So when we look at qualitative data, the challenges that we see is that ultimately they tend to be time sensitive. It tends to be very much at a point in time when you receive that data, you receive those answers. It's also something that we found to be very difficult to scale or to manage at a larger scale. It doesn't grow with your user base very easily. And I think one of the most important challenges that I've seen is that in qualitative data is actually that it allows a lot of room for bias. So a lot of room for bias from those people that you're speaking to, from responses that you may be getting from surveys, from user input that you're getting. There's a lot of room for bias. And when we start to compare this with quantitative data, which inherently in tracking those user actions is an unbiased source of data, it also scales very easily with the user base. As your user base grows, you're going to have a bigger wealth of information to pull from, factual quantitative data that describes what your users are doing. And finally, I think that, again, one of the most important things here is that because you're tracking those user actions, because you're quantifying that user data, it's a very reliable source of data that allows you to get answers, get inputs to exactly what it is that users are doing across your digital assets. Having said all that, I don't want you to think that qualitative data is not an important metric. It's not an important source of data. And actually qualitative data is still very useful and can present great insights into what your users are doing, especially when you compare that, especially when you start to combine that with the quantitative product data that your users are doing. So I think just to summarize some of the points that we've got here, it's that as much as organizations are leveraging a number of types of data, they're relying most heavily on quantifiable data, but they're also combining that with qualitative data to get a full holistic view of their user base and leverage that to make insightful decisions in the features that they release and innovate within the market. And I think the final thing to touch on here is that, and this may seem pretty obvious, right? But it's the fact that actually product teams, when they come to analyzing data, when they pick a tool to come in and analyze this data, product teams more than any other tool are leveraging product analytics tools to get answers to the questions that they have. And I think this leads very well into the next slide and the next insight that we took out of the report, right? And it's actually that they're tracking these different, or they're leveraging these different types of data, but actually what type of metrics are they tracking? What type of metrics are they focusing on that are really going to enable them to get the answers to their questions, right? So again, across all industries and regions, we've surveyed around what are the most important metrics that matter for your product teams. And I think unsurprisingly, we saw three key metrics matter the most. So retention, engagement, and conversion. But I think what stood out the most here is actually the order of those. So actually we saw retention come out on top at a single percentage above engagement. And actually that's something that we kind of found quite interesting at Mixpanel. What we actually, at Mixpanel, we focus a lot on active usage, which actually came fifth in importance in this metric survey here. So I think that was something that we found a little bit interesting. And then I guess finally out of those top three, what we've got is conversion. So I think that when we take a little bit more of a look at conversion, I think that conversion being the third highest metric, what's interesting when we start to dig a little bit more into that is actually we break this down by region. And this is something that we go to in a little bit more depth in the report itself. But when we start to compare EMEA against US, what we actually found is that revenue is something that beat out conversion, specifically in the US. But then when we look at revenue in EMEA, it's something that actually dropped a lot lower. And I think that's something that is very characteristic of the, I guess, the markets, the industries, the regions, and actually how these metrics are going to differ depending on the region that you're in, depending on the industry that you work in, but ultimately across that whole user base, the three that were most important were retention, engagement, and then followed by conversion. So coming back to that point that I just touched on again, I think about making sure that the metrics that matter the most to you are defined specific to your region, to your industry. We then started to dig a little bit deeper into these metrics and understand actually how do they break down depending on the industries that you're currently working in and the industries where you have released your products. And I think there was some pretty interesting results here. The first thing to point out is that there was a clear change in those focus metrics across those different industries. And there's no one focus metric that was the most important that spanned across all industries. And if we start to look into this in a little bit more depth, I think the first example that we can call out here is B2B, so B2B software. And in that case, retention was the single most important metric, with around 76% of the people that we surveyed ranking that the highest, most important. And actually they ranked conversion the lowest. And this doesn't mean that conversion is not a metric that matters to them. What it means is that for B2B product teams, that when they come to making product decisions, when they come to making decisions about what features to focus on, what features to release, the metric that they turn to first, and the metric that they're most likely to base those decisions on is retention. Let's go back. And then when we start to compare that across those other industries, what we can look at next is the retail and consumer tech space. And what we see here is that we can actually, I think, assume very, very fairly that what retail cares about, what consumer tech cares about, is converting users as quickly and as efficiently as possible through potentially a purchase funnel, but you want to allow them to make that purchasing decision as quick as possible. And I think that that gets reflected very, very clearly in the fact that conversion in retail, 81% defining that being the most important metric that they care about. And then finally, we look at the financial and the media space. And I think here, unsurprisingly, what we saw is that engagement was the highest metric for these organizations, and engagement is what they really care about. And when we start to, I guess, focus on actually what metrics are they looking at that relate to engagement, we start to see that they really care about these meaningful user engagements. So completing a transaction or liking and sharing a piece of content, for example. As well as, I guess, more typical metrics when we look at session duration and weekly active users, but they really care about how engaged you are as an organization or as an end user with their products. So I think that hopefully this gives you a little bit more information around potentially how you and your product teams are stacking up in your industries today. But I think touching a little bit more around how do you define the focus metrics that matter the most for your industry, for your organization and your product teams. And I think that there's a number of ways to do this. And I think that the most important thing first is actually making sure that you can understand those benchmarks in your industry and understand how they relate to you and your product teams. But I think with that, there also needs to be a more granular approach. And this needs to be combined with more specific focus metrics that allow you to understand exactly how your users are engaging with your platform. And I think one of the first things to really dive into is making sure that you can identify that value moment that your users are taking out. And again, this is something that is going to change across the different industries that we look at. In media, it's going to be like playing a piece of content, finance, completing a transaction, or for example, in software as a service, sharing a file or starting a chat with the agent, right? When you then start to combine this with the natural frequency, so how often are users starting to complete these actions, it's really going to start to help you dive in and start to identify what are those focus metrics that are going to aid your product team to really help get an answer to those questions and start to build the products, build the features that align to the product analytics strategy and can ultimately help you innovate in the market. Just the one thing to touch on here, we do have another report called the Product Metrics Framework available through Mixpanel. That's going to help you understand a little bit more really around how you can focus in on that product analytics strategy and how you can start to define those focus metrics that really help you to get answers to these questions. And I think this leads, again, very well into the next slide, that if you don't have these metrics, if you don't have these answers to these questions, what challenges are product teams and product leaders facing today that ultimately isn't allowing them to get the answers to the questions that they care about? And actually, it's a combination of things when we got the feedback from the people that we surveyed. So I think the three big ones and the three top challenges that we've seen is ultimately being able to collect the data that they need, right? So we first need to collect that data and provide access to the product teams to make sure they can get answers to the questions that they have. The second thing that came out of this is being able to trust the data. And you probably all very aware how important it is to make sure that the data that you're collecting, the data that you have access for, is that you have the trust in that data. So you know that the decisions that you make off of that are going to be impactful and are going to have that solid foundation in reliable data. And the final thing here is essentially not just having access to data, but being able to have the technical skills and the capability to get an answer to those questions that you care about. And I think this is something that I see a lot of across all of the organizations that I speak to. And what we tend to see is that there are a lot of companies that have a dedicated data team. They have dedicated data scientists, data engineers that have the necessary capabilities, that have that SQL knowledge, that have that reliance on BI tools to be able to pull the questions of the data that they want to pull very easily. But I think one of the concepts that we push very heavily at Mixpanel, and that's the fact that all product analytics data should be self-serve. So regardless of where you're sitting in this organization, whether you're in a product team, marketing team, you should be able to go in and ask a question and get an answer very quickly and easily. And I think this is something that, again, is something that is true across all industries, true across all organizations that we speak to. But I think these key challenges that we're seeing here are really holding product teams back today in being able to get the answers to the questions that are going to enable them to drive forward and make those decisions that are really going to have an impact and give you that edge in the market that we see. And I think that the next thing is really starting to understand how, as an organization, you're stacking up and making sure that when you don't have the right tools to answer these questions, what is it that you're missing out on as an organization? What is it that you can't understand about your users, and what is that not enabling you to do? So I think the first and most important thing here is that the challenges that we've seen today and the gaps that we've seen today is helping people understand actually that they don't understand where users are dropping off. So at what point in our product, this could be a sign-up flow, this could be a conversion funnel, but what there is not a clear visibility of today is being able to understand that actually I, as a product team, understand where we are losing users in that key journey that we care about. The next thing that we saw is actually what is it that is bringing our users back to our product? So what is really driving retention? What is driving stickiness? And what is it that is engaging our users to come back and make repeat trips to my product and to my platform? There are other metrics here around ultimately understanding customer journey and being able to map that out across platform. And the final thing here, which I think is very important, right? As product teams, you spend a lot of time researching, you spend a lot of time building out the features that you're going to releasing. It's super important that you're able to define and understand the impact that those feature launches are having on key metrics within your analytics strategy. How is this feature release affecting my bottom line metric? How is it affecting session duration? How is it affecting those value moments that we spoke about in those previous slides? And I think that these challenges can be caused by a number of things. And I think that they very much tie into the things that we spoke about in the last slide. They tie into having those challenges around not being able to get access to the data, not being able to trust the data. But I think this can be caused by a number of things. It can be caused by potentially a bad implementation of a product analytics. It can be caused by bad naming conventions that ultimately leads to product teams not having the trust in the data. It can lead to product analytics teams or product management teams not having the relevant skill set to analyze this data. And I think that saying we don't have the relevant skill set is a little bit of a I guess a trap or a trick question, right? In regards to, I don't think product managers have the ability to be able to write SQL queries, and a lot of them do, or don't have the ability to be able to leverage a BI tool. But I think ultimately what they don't have is the time, right? It's not efficient in their roles to be spending time leveraging SQL, to be spending time leveraging these BI tools. And actually what is going to be more efficient, so PMs can focus on doing research, can focus on building the tools and building the features that are going to matter to their end users, is that they have access to this data and are able to get these answers as and when they are happening and pull out insights very easily. And I think just to kind of go on to the next slide here, I think that the bottom line around that is really around enabling product teams, enabling the people that we've surveyed and the customers that I speak to as Mixpanel, is enabling them to make sure that they have the right tools to be able to access the data that is the most important to them. And this is what is going to allow innovation in your space. This is what is going to allow you as product people to jump into a tool very quickly and easily and understand how is that feature that I have just released impacting my core metrics that we have defined as an organization. And I think that this is something that we push at Mixpanel very heavily. The one side of that is making sure that self-serve is important. But I think ultimately when we look at the customers that we have at Mixpanel, the one thing that is very clear is that on average, we're able to improve conversion rates, we're able to improve user engagement, and we're able to improve retention, all by more than 30%. And for me, that is just by enabling product teams to get the answers that they need to the questions that ultimately allow them to make the correct decisions going forward. And I think with all that being said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Christian at Elite International, and he's going to be able to talk you guys through how him and his organization are able to enable all customers throughout this whole process.
Thank you, Ross. That was a really interesting overview of the report. And what I really like about it is that what you've been talking about, what you guys found is really echoing what we've seen in practice with our clients through our experience. So to start talking about how driving growth, how you can drive growth with the power of product analytics, I'd like to start off with how does product analytics actually fits into the overall MarTech ecosystem. And what you can see here on the screen is an extensive diagram of marketing technology solutions that were integrated in order to deliver that holistic customer experience we are all aiming for. And you can see that the journey actually starts with product analytics, Mixpanel in this case, where you start tracking that customer's behavior in a digital product. So what they do in it, how they spend their time in your product, what they like and what they don't like. And once you start analyzing and processing this data, those insights, those valuable insights start to come out and you get a deeper understanding of your audience. But not just the understanding, but it's the real power is that you can use this data in a multitude of ways. You can send this data to your customer engagement platform, such as, let's say, Braze, for example, where you can use it to target specific segments with personalized communications via push notifications, in-app messages, web messages, or email. You can send this data to a customer data management solution, such as Segment in this case, and then enhance this data with other sources, such as your website analytics, your campaign attribution data, your data from your advertising platforms, and build those dynamic segments which are updated in real time across your whole stack. You can then use this data to, for example, show personalized content on your website using an intelligent CMS like Sitecore. You can use this data to stream it to your data warehouse and then build advanced business reports on it, make your product decisions, make your business decision on top of that, as well as send this data to your acquisition channels and try to find new audiences for your product that fit your customer profile. So I would say that the real power happens when you combine all of these best-in-class solutions when they start working in synergy. However, having such an extensive stack will probably mean that you'll be getting terabytes of data daily, if not hourly. And now, to echo back to what you were talking before, it's understanding which of that data actually matters. So which are the metrics you wanna answer. So stuff like, how are your users navigating your product? Which are your most popular features? Which feature launch made an impact? What's keeping users coming back to your product, but also what's keeping them stop using it? And what are the features you're missing that your competitors have? And naturally, at the beginning of your product lifetime, you'll be relying almost completely on qualitative data. So stuff like insights and knowledge from your internal teams, from sales, marketing people, conversations with any customers, if you have any conversation with friends, with colleagues, running online surveys, running focus groups, researching your competitors in the market. And as you start growing your product and getting those users in, you'll start getting more and more quantitative data. And that's when you start relying your decision more on quantitative data. So stuff like product analytics, stuff like marketing campaign performances, KPIs, etc. And to be able to make those data-driven decisions. However, what I think that one of the most important things in this is identifying the aha moment of your product. And that is the moment when users get the core value of your product, what your product is for, why they need it in their lives, and what benefit do they get from it. And pinpointing this moment and then capitalizing on it will enable you to make the right product development, marketing, business, and engagement decisions. So many of the greats owe their success to doing this, exactly this. So that's, for example, Slack with their 2,000 messages sent between a team, or Dropbox with their one file in one folder on one device, or Facebook when they got that you get hooked on once you connect with 10 friends within 7 days. Now, to move on away from theory and a little bit in practice, I'd like to go through a short case study of what we've done with one of our clients in helping them increase those important metrics using product analytics. So the product in question is Pixfood, an AI-driven digital food assistant that uses photo recognition and users' dietary preferences and their food allergies to deliver personalized video recipes. So having such an cool bio, we managed to launch this product and get it featured in some of the top industry media such as TechCrunch, Entrepreneur, Lifehacker, and a couple more. We also did a product hunt launch, and we managed to end up as number 3 as product of the day when we did. And eventually this led up to getting our first few thousand users in just 3 months. However, not everything was going smoothly for us, because even after we got our first users, we were having troubles retaining those newly acquired users. And that's when Mixpanel actually entered the picture. So using Mixpanel's funnels and flow module, we were able to notice that we were seeing a huge drop-off of users right after they open the app and before they make the next step in their journey, which was taking a photo of an ingredient. And this was really bugging us because we had designed this really nice onboarding tutorial that explained the app to the users, explained the value and why they need to take a photo to get a recipe recommendation. So we decided to go even deeper in the data, and we started segmenting the users and analyzing their step-by-step journey with the product. And what was surprising for us is that of all of the users that passed that first step in the app, more than 60% were not allowing access to the camera, which was the main feature of the app itself. So obviously there was something wrong with it. And when we went to the next step, first we saw that of all of those users that did not allow access to the camera, more than 80% were skipping an onboarding tutorial. And even though we were a bit surprised and a bit offended, to be honest, by this finding, we had to come to the natural conclusion that our onboarding tutorial was actually boring to the users. So we decided to spice things up a bit. We decided to, instead of a swiping tutorial on app launch, we decided to introduce an interactive action-based onboarding scenario. So this meant we left users to explore the app on their own, scroll around it, see what features it has. And whenever they reached a certain action or a milestone in the app, in their journey with the app, a pop-up would appear to explain what's the purpose of that action. For example, if they were scrolling to browsing to recipes and click to save a recipe, a pop-up would come up to ask them to create an account so they can start save recipes for later, but also add their dietary preferences so they can get more personalized recipes. Or for example, when they would tap the camera icon, they would get a series of messages that explain that if they use the camera to take a photo of an ingredient, they'll get a recipe that has it. Of course, to do so, they'll have to give access to the camera, but at this point, this made much more sense for them, and they were much more happier to give access to the camera of their smartphone. Apart just from changing the scenario, we also decided to add cross-channel engagement to the mix. So we also used the same the same milestones and actions in the journey to build our cross-channel strategy around it. And then using Mixpanel's messaging and engagement module, we're engaging our customers with personalized in-app messages, push notifications, and email to nudge them to take that next action in their journey. So these were stuff like if we notice that a user hasn't opened the app in a week, we would send a push notification with a tasty recipe to ask them to come back to open the app. Or if we saw that somebody's been browsing recipes for a while but has not created an account, we would send an in-app message to explain the benefits of creating an account and getting personalized recipes with your food allergies in it as well. Or for example, when we did get users that created an account, we could then use the email channel as well to send product update information, to send weekly newsletters, to send personalized emails with recipes built around the season or a national holiday, etc. But also we use these channels to invite our happy and active users to rate the app in the App Store or to invite their friends to download it as well. And combining these two strategies, the product development and the cross-channel engagement, inevitably led to positive outcomes for our product. So in just a few months, we managed to send over 1 million personalized email, push, and in-app messages to our customers. We managed to increase the number of sign-ups by 15%, which led to a 30% increase in retention rates of our newly acquired users, and which led to our favorite metric. It was that now we had over 2,500 Pix Food recipes being cooked on a monthly basis. Now, I don't want to sound like we've invented data-driven growth. We were just following what the big players were already doing. So in this interesting experiment Airbnb ran a couple of years ago, they were trying out 3 different ways for their app login screen. So in their control group, they were sending users straight to the homepage where they can see the listings of apartments. In their first segment, they shown a dismissible sign-up wall containing a few sliding screens that presented the value proposition of Airbnb. In their second segment, they showed a non-dismissible sign-up wall with just a photo of some happy people around a table, their logo, and the buttons prompting them to create an account. Now, I think that most of us here, including myself, would say that the segment 1 outwon the group because it's following app development best practices, it's delivering the value proposition of the app, etc. However, when the data came back in, the Airbnb team was surprised to see that the second segment actually not just brought a 40% increase in signups, it also brought a 2.6% increase in the bookings made. So to me, this is a irrefutable proof that real user data will always outpower the gut feeling of product marketeers. However, I'm also a true believer that true product innovation and growth happens only when you combine the right data with the right creative and strategic minds in your organization. So people and data, that's for me the winning formula for driving growth with product analytics. And with this, I think I've done with my section. So Charlie, I think we're up for the chat and the Q&A session from the audience. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Christian, for sharing your perspective in that case study. It was very interesting. And thank you, Ross, of course, for telling us about the state of product analytics. So with that, I'd like to move us into the fireside chat portion of today's event. So as a reminder to our audience, you can submit any questions via the Q&A widget, and we'll start answering those momentarily. So Christian, why don't we move out of presentation mode and kick things off?
Yeah, sure.
Great. So to begin, I'm going to pose this question to Christian as our guest. We'd love to understand how you think about balancing having a complete understanding of all the various metrics around your product while staying focused and not falling into the trap of analysis paralysis.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I guess that many of the people working in analytics, they get overwhelmed with the amount of metrics you can track these days. And what I think that it's very important at this moment is to keep your focus and identify your key performance metrics. And this will be a different metric for every business, of course. So for example, if you're a software company, this might be the number of demos you book for your product. And then you start working backwards from that key performance metric and start understanding how do you get people to complete that action. So you go back and see that, for example, you start comparing whether that the leads you get from your Google Ads campaigns book twice as many demos than the leads you get from your LinkedIn ads. And this metric is now giving you an insight for action, which is move ad dollars from LinkedIn to Google. So it's not a vanity metric, and you're not being paralyzed by the hundreds of metrics you will getting from your tools. Another way to help avoid this is if you put revenue goals for your marketing teams. So because at the end of the day, that's what a business is for. So once you set these goals, you start again working backwards and identify the key moments in your customer's journey that translate into revenue. And these are the metrics that you should focus on improving. That would be my take on the question.
Yeah, great. And I can just add a little bit to that. And I think that I 100% agree with the approach that Christian has outlined there. And I think that if you've been a part of a Mixpanel or webinar that I presented at before, you know that I push a lot around the product metrics framework that we speak about here at Mixpanel. And I think the goal of that is to really kind of, as Christian says, like work backwards. First of all, it's to identify what that focus metric is. And then it's to understand what feeds into that. And then you can ultimately use that to define your analytics strategy. And I've kind of seen across a number of customers that if they kind of go with the other approach where actually they just track everything possible up front, what they end up with is a very noisy analytics strategy, a very noisy analytics tool that doesn't very easily surface the answers to the questions that you're trying to pose. So I think that just to kind of reiterate what Christian said, that one of the most important things to do in defining an analytics strategy is define those metrics that are key to you and work backwards from those to understand what is the events, what do I need to track about my users that ultimately feeds into that focus metric that we care about. And again, I'm just going to kind of push you towards the guide to product metrics report that we have available in Mixpanel, which is a great kind of structure in helping you to define what that looks like and avoid this analysis paralysis that we talk about.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. Wanted to move on to one other question before I move into some of our questions from the audience. So we obviously all have been talking a lot about the impact of COVID on how we consume products, how we build products, how we promote and market products. So could we just dig into a little bit, both Ross and Christian, your view on how you see the role of product analytics in particular changing as a result of the impact of COVID? Maybe Ross, or Christian, please kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say that given the current situation, I think that analytics and especially product analytics is more important than it has been ever before. And this is because the COVID-19 and the whole pandemic situation has shown that the world must become more digital and do it as fast as possible. So we've seen businesses that go from brick and mortar into digital overnight. We've seen governments start to finally provide their services online, as they should have been done for years. We've seen people going online to satisfy most of the day-to-day needs, such as working, learning, socializing, entertaining, shopping, and even exercise. This means that businesses are generating more customer data than ever before, and businesses are not having that face-to-face interaction with customers as much as they used to before. So they have to rely on digital data to understand their customers, to understand what they want and how they can create a better experience, a better product or better service for them, and in turn to grow their business in this new, more digitalized world.
Yeah, and again, I think that 100% agree with kind of what Christian has said there. And I think that as user behavior is changing, I think it's important to truly understand what it is that's changing, why it is that's changing, how is this going to impact the customers that we had prior to COVID, and how is that going to affect as COVID starts to kind of hopefully ramp down and we kind of go back to some level of normality. Starting to track users over that time, track how their behavior is changing, is something that is ultimately going to help drive product decisions going forward. So yeah, just to kind of summarize my thoughts, it's that product analytics is more important than useful. Capturing user behavior now is something that is going to help define how products shape going forward, how we work with tools as we kind of work from home more. Understanding how that user behavior is changing is something that we should be capturing and we should be looking at on a daily basis. So the only thing I can add to Christian there is that absolutely product analytics, that quantifiable data around how your users are changing during this time is super important and shouldn't be taken lightly.
Great, thank you. And so we've had a question from the audience posed to Christian, asking what expertise is required within the teams that you need who run the analysis in a product. So for example, if you don't have a marketing team and you have limited resources to get started.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, since it's data in question, I would say that having a data analyst on board is probably a prerequisite. Maybe not an engineer or anything, but definitely somebody that understands data, but more importantly, understands data in a business, in the context of your business. So in order to be able to understand which metrics are important for your business and be able to set up and find the ways to get those metrics and get the insights that matter. And what's interesting, I think Ross can talk a bit more about this, is that many of the tools we digital marketers use today, including Mixpanel, are packed with really detailed academies and resources that people can take and learn. And I truly believe that, because I have used it myself, you don't have to be a technical person to be able to work in Mixpanel and many of the other analytics tools you can find today, and to be able to get those insights that matter. Yeah,
and I think that, like, just to add on top of that, I think that I think I spoke about it a little bit during the presentation, but I think that the concept we talk about Mixpanel is the democratization of data, right? And I think that the idea here is that anybody across the organization should be able to go in and get an answer to the question that they want to pose. So I think that leveraging a product tool, especially a product tool such as Mixpanel, is something that is not, you don't need to come in having a data science degree. You don't need to have this wealth of SQL knowledge to be able to take insights from the tools that are available today, especially Mixpanel, right? So as much as when we talk about what expertise is required, I think that the short answer is there is no specific data science analytics expertise needed to start to get answers to the questions and to start to gather value out of this product analytics and user data.
Yeah, as a continuation to that question, because I think a lot of times what's really required is just a general curiosity and desire to understand user behavior, right? But perhaps using a tool like Mixpanel or whatever tool that you decide to use to understand, just getting your foot kind of in the door. How do you recommend people get started in their journey of using a product analytics or similar tool to understand user behavior?
Can you repeat that one again?
Yeah, how do you recommend people might get started if they're just new to introducing product analytics into how they understand user behavior?
Well, I'll take this question. I'll answer it in a little bit different way. I hope that that gets the answer to our viewer. But I would say that if you're in the beginning of your business, of your product lifetime, you should be focusing more on non-scalable activities. And so trying to get those first users, trying to get the word out, try to get some interesting peer mention, find some growth hacking tactics you can use to get those first users. And while you're doing that, I would suggest relying more on basic and free analytics solutions, such as Google Analytics or Firebase, as you're in the beginning of your product journey. As you begin to grow your product and get more users in, and more importantly, get some kind of a revenue income, whether it's a funding or genuine revenue from your customers, that is the moment when you start to thinking about upgrading your game, your MarTech game, and getting a more sophisticated solution such as Mixpanel into play. And because it wouldn't be valuable to set this up if you still are at the beginning of your product's lifetime.
Yeah, and I think absolutely agree with Christian. I think that there are a lot of great free solutions out there, whether we're talking about Google Analytics. Mixpanel has a free offering as well. But I think the idea here is to kind of just get started, right? I think that we've spoken about a lot of these kind of big product analytics strategies and these key focus metrics in previous, but I don't think there's a huge barrier to start tracking a few key events about your users, and that can grow with you as an organization. So it's very easy to jump into, especially a tool like Mixpanel, but Google Analytics as well, and start tracking those key events, those daily active users, those weekly active users metrics that matter the most to you. And then as your organization, as your product grows, you're able to layer on other more focused metrics about that user base and ultimately grow your analytics solution with your organization. So I think that allows you to get in there very easily and start to ask those questions. And I can guarantee you as soon as you start to ask some of those questions, there's going to be more questions that arise, more questions that you want answers to. And that's when you start to grow with your product analytics tool, right? Grow with your product analytics strategy. So yeah, I guess my advice, my answer to that question would be to kind of go out there, just get started collecting data and get started asking questions of that data.
Yeah, I think it's going to come to a natural position when the product grows and you just realize that the current setting you have, the current tech stack is not satisfying your needs, not giving you the answers you need, and it's a natural evolution. I mean, you'll get there.
Great, thank you. Slight pivot, but we have another really interesting question from Matt here, who's wondering how you know that the results that you're seeing in quantitative data are caused by your actions or your initiatives and not other factors.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Well, the most obvious answers, the most obvious and straightforward answer is control groups. Obviously, that's like probably in the basics of any marketing campaign you could run. But in this case, it can be a product development one. And like, for example, Facebook does it all the time. Whenever they launch a new feature, they don't do it at their whole user base, never. They usually pick a country or two to test their new features for a month or two before they make a decision whether it's gonna be a product-wide development decision or not. And the same with marketing campaigns. Of course, you can always use control groups to see, to compare if you see an increase in a metric, let's say conversions, in the control group or the group that got your new marketing campaign. At the end of the day, yeah, it's not 100%. Sometimes other factors will impact it, like external factors, like the whole COVID-19 situation, political factors, economical factors, social factors, etc. Of course, we can't control everything, but we can try to do our best to give the best experience to our customers.
Yeah, and I think to add to that again, Mixpanel specifically has some great features to enable this for you. I think propensity modeling and causal impact are some great examples of that. But I think that what that kind of boils down to for me is that not just analyzing this across your whole user base, but actually splitting your user base into different cohorts, into different segments of demographics of power users and low engaged users, and ultimately comparing your analytics strategy or your questions across these different groups to ultimately understand if we have a specific outlying group that is driving the behavior more than another. And that's going to give you a little bit more guidance into where can you focus your questions, what groups should you be dedicating your time on for these specific feature releases. I think control groups is very much an important part of that, but equally is maybe making sure that you can create these very important groups of user behavior and defining how your different features, your different questions are performing across your groups of users, right? And again, Mixpanel has some great tools that allow you to do that very easily and to compare the behavior of those groups of users, so you can at least have some confidence in knowing that the features that you release, the metrics that you're measuring are performing across your whole user base, or actually they're just being performed by your power users and actually your low engaged users are doing something slightly different, right? So making sure that you're analyzing across groups is something that's going to help with this massively.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on that, like, for example, if you do a feature launch on your and test it on your most engaged, your brand ambassadors, your most loyal customers, it might even not make any change. But if you do it with your low engaged users, it might bump up their engagement with the product. So yeah, I agree with Ross. This is also very important.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. So we have time for just one more question before I read off that question. To the audience, we would absolutely love your feedback. We've talked a lot about qualitative versus quantitative data, and this is where I, as a marketer, would be so grateful for your qualitative feedback via the survey. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. If you would just take 30 seconds to respond, that would be excellent. And with that, let me just ask our last question from the audience, from Gareth. I hope I'm saying your name right. He's asking, when implementing the guided onboarding, did Pixfood do it bit by bit or implement across the whole app straight away? Any tips on doing this?
Well, we did implement the whole onboarding scenario throughout the whole app at once. If you're referring to all those steps I've mentioned with the action-based scenario. However, we did do a control group, as I mentioned at the beginning, for which we didn't send an app update to see if it made that difference before we spread it to the whole user base. Hope that answers your question.
Great. All right. So with that, the survey is in the window. So again, just appreciate any feedback that the audience would be willing to share. And as mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar along with a few of the resources mentioned throughout the session today. So stay tuned for that hitting your inbox within the next 24 hours. And then lastly, I'd just like to thank our audience for all of your wonderful questions and our two speakers, Ross and Christian, for your time. So thank you all so much.
Cheers, guys, and thank you for hosting, Charlie.
All right,
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.